Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind comics like Hip Hop Family Tree and the upcoming X-Men Grand Design at Marvel. It's Ed Piskor. Thanks for coming on, Ed.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
So on a lot of podcasts, I like to kick things off with just kind of, trying to figure out what creators' background is with comics, because everyone has a kind of different path, not just into making comics, but into reading comics. And given the fact that X-Men Grand Design is all about retelling one of Marvel's greatest franchises, I feel like it's extra necessary to talk about your past. So, Ed, what is your comic book origin story? Like, how did you first start getting into reading comics?
I grew up in a house where I had a couple stacks of them. For whatever reason, my dad just spoiled me before I was even sentient in a way. So I woke when I was first aware, I had all kinds of toys and comic magazines, like video games. My mom had Atari. So even though I'm born in 1982, I don't remember a time before video games. Same thing with comics. My dad's brother was a big time comics reader. He wasn't necessarily a collector, so what he would do is get his stack for the week or whatever, read the stuff, and then it would end up at my house.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first comics that I remember being able to read myself was an issue of X-Men, and I was puzzled by the names on the initial splash page. Chris Claremont, Dave Cockrum, so on and so forth. And I asked my mom, what's that about? And she told me that these are the people who were responsible for creating this comic. So quite literally, and I have a lot of evidence to back it up. I began my whole life's kind of trajectory from that moment forward to grow up and become a cartoonist. Like if you met somebody that I went to kindergarten with and you told them that I was a cartoonist, they would not be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
So X-Men was a big part of my life. In the 80s, I was very lucky to be able to read classic X-Men, which reprinted extremely expensive issues of X-Men from the mid 1970s and later.
Yeah.
And then I was able to read it as it came out, basically. And I read classic X-Men up until the point where it reached the place where I was reading the regular series,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was able to indulge in kind of the best of both worlds. X-Men 1 happens with the 5 covers. The adults destroyed the sports card collector's market with speculation and all kinds of nonsense. So then they jumped over to comics. Then they created a highly inflated, very weird time period where X-Men 1 that had 8 million copies was worth like $20 an issue or something
Right.
like that for 3 weeks. But I followed the creators of that. So I followed Jim Lee, I followed Rob Liefeld, I followed Todd McFarlane over to Image. They did their thing for a little while, but then they weren't making their deadlines. The books weren't coming out regularly. And I discovered Fantagraphics, Hernandez Brothers, Dan Clowes, Robert Crumb, Charles
Mm-hmm.
Burns. And I sort of never looked back to the big two in any significant way. I think the last monthly comic that I collected regularly, every month in, month out, was probably Preacher.
Mm.
And that ended when I was a Kubert school student, when I was like 18 years old. So I've pretty much been into just digging deep into older stuff lately, and comic strip reprints, getting nice books
Yeah.
that fit on a bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
I just got that Chris Ware monograph that's totally blowing my mind. I recommend it to everybody.
You know, that came out, and I swear to God, like I didn't hear anything about it until I saw a comic shop that was like sharing pictures of it, and being like, "This is unbelievable." And it's funny how like a Chris Ware book could kind of sneak up on me. I don't. Or I guess it's not like it's not really a full comic. What is its status really?
Well, I mean, it is a monograph.
Yeah.
But it's funny because usually a monograph is written and compiled by someone else
Mm-hmm.
about a person's career. But he fully designs it himself, chooses, lays it out, and writes the whole thing. So it's a career spanning, highly steeped in his early period and in his uh sort of his early days or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it to be highly inspirational. It's amazing how the level of work that he did just as a college student is better than almost every professional I know uh, at this point right now. Like, he's an astonishing artist. I was inspired to like just you know uh, this sort of the scope of the work that he did. You can't do that in a world where you can be addicted to like the internet and be on your iPhone every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So it really inspired me to like keep my phone in the other room. Don't sleep with it in the same room. Like, basically, take it off that do not disturb mode so that if a ring comes in, you'll hear it, but get the hell away from it and stay creative, stay on the grind, keep working, make something great. Don't be distracted by these silly influences.
Yeah. I just read a book that was all about that, and it is kind of interesting trying to like change your habits when you've had that in a while. It sounds like you actually have a pretty good approach to it, much better than mine at least.
Well, it's just like the way comics works. It's such a laborious enterprise
Especially the way you
that,
do it.
well, maybe,
I mean,
maybe.
no, I mean not like process wise, but I mean you're a cartoonist. You do everything.
Right, yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. And you just need time to do that. So it's you gotta do what you gotta do, man.
Hmm.
I love and adore my sister, but she had a destination wedding last year, and I didn't go.
Yeah.
She understood, and I made sure to give her a good gift and everything. But I'm running a one man business, and I'm the bottleneck. If I get sick or something, then the pages don't get done, the comic gets delayed, the
Hmm.
printer already has that time booked. It could be a big snowball of errors.
Right. So I actually want to ask a question that I read in another interview that you did. It's not a question that I read. It's something that you said. You said that you have 50 long boxes or 50 plus long boxes and like all of these trades and hardcovers, in your house, and how you describe yourself as a DJ to people with your records just being your comics. And I thought that was awesome. I thought that was really fantastic. This is a total tangent, but what do you think that a comic collection says about a person? Like, do you think that's meaningful in the same way as a DJ, like who favors specific records or something?
Well, I know some DJs, right?
Right.
And while they may favor certain records, they'll still grab a lot. Like, they'll still have an extremely wide range of a collection.
Hmm.
Um, so I do think a person's collection says something about them. But a person like me, if you looked at my collection, you would just say that this is like, this guy is like all in when it comes to comics, because there will be a box of Archies and Dino Mutt and stuff like that. But then I have everything.
Hmm.
I have everything. To me, the more interesting thing is, I'm very good friends with all of the comic shop owners here in town, and whenever they buy a new collection from somebody, some old dying guy or something, um, I'll check it out every now and again just to see what their bounty was,
Hmm.
and that's more fascinating because you see, like, okay, like this guy, he's obviously very butch because all that he has is like Conan comics, Sergeant Rock,
Hmm.
um, and like the only Spider-Man comic that he has is issue 129 with first appearance of Punisher. So it's like this guy's into guns,
Right.
that kind of thing, and that happens more often than not whenever uh, I see these collections. So I always like to kind of imagine, who the person was. And in fact, I myself have bought a few collections here and there, some really good ones, and I myself kind of think about like who the heck was this guy,
Right.
because I bought this one collection and it's like all milk crates and it's not fandom type stuff. It's not long boxes and acid free bags. It's like these like really like neatly stacked like milk crates and all these weird. So it felt like a really hopeful kind of
Yeah.
play. Like I don't know what I'll find in here. And in fact, I did find some really amazing stuff. But the guy was also fairly hip because it's like, okay, I have every issue of Iron Fist except the one with Sabretooth,
Mm-hmm.
So he knew something, but he didn't know so much because I also got, the Neil Adams, junky issue of Green Lantern and, a couple good Byrne X-Men's and stuff like so like I sort of appreciate that question because it is something that I think about a lot, like when it comes to just going over friends' houses and like raiding their comic boxes. It's like, if you have a friend, man, who has like a lot of tattoos and likes Glenn Danzig, they probably have a lot of Chaos Comics, Evil
Mm-hmm.
Ernie, and like Lady Death.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I really have like two main comic friends that I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and
Yeah.
there's two main people I know that have collected comics at some point, and one is like the most ride or die, well, maybe not the most ride or die X-Men fan you've ever met, because I'm talking to somebody who's retelling the entire story, but he is like a hardcore X-Men fan, and that's his thing. And then the other friend. When I asked her if I could borrow some of her comics, she just loaned me a whole bunch of Daniel Close, a whole bunch of Love and Rockets. Like she's got all like the original issues for Love and Rockets and everything, and it's just really fascinating. It's like I have these two hugely different like people to talk to about comics in town. It's way different.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because what you described is but a microcosm of just like how the comics culture works. You know what I'm saying, man?
Yeah.
Like my Fantagraphics people, they make fun of me, man, for doing this Marvel thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Marvel cats, they don't even know who Dan Clowes is.
Right.
You know what I'm saying, man? So that's the universe we live in. Me personally, I'm going to dip my toes in every pool,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to be snobbish about what I like. You know what I'm saying? If people have trouble or they're mad at me for doing like a Marvel thing, whatever.
So you're like the DJs you were talking about, who you have your favorites, but at the same time you like to kind of sample all over the place.
Well, I think it's just like I'm not. Of course, I have a giant ego, man, but I'm not so narcissistic as to think that I have like all the answers for everything.
Sure.
So even in this X-Men comic, uh, I can't think of a better way to draw Angel kind of hiding his wings with his clothes than Jack Kirby did in the very first issue of X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know what, I'm lifting that,
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking it. He's now Kirby is now James Brown to me, and I'm taking this beat and I'm putting it into this thing. And turning it into something new. I'm turning it into my own thing. Um, and so I'm not unapologetic about doing that.
So it's like you're sampling.
I'm sampling. Exactly. I mean, that's where the DJ metaphor comes from, man. It's like these are the reason I have these things is for sample and inspiration.
Yeah. I'd love to know what the X-Men equivalent of Apache would be.
Yeah, that's good, man. You have me on the spot. I couldn't pull something out right away.
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. But so I want to, before we really get into Grand Design, I want to ask about two of the big creators that are going to be a part of Grand Design for you. One thing I thought was really interesting is like you said that in an interview that you read everything up to 280 like 4 or 5 times, but the Byrne stuff, the Byrne and Claremont stuff, you read 50 plus times. What is it about that collaboration that's so specifically your jam?
I don't think that's a controversial statement.
No, not at all.
Right. Um, there's just something. I mean, that is. I think that if you were to ask Chris Claremont, like he would probably say that that was like they were firing on all cylinders at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most of that material is gonna, like, it's encompassed in my third issue of Grand Design, which I just finished.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to go back and reread that stuff all again as a unit, as one piece, and damn it, it all works
Mm-hmm.
together. It all works together, and what I think is really great about it is that there are very few instances in comics, maybe five or less, certainly less than 10, where I can say, to my taste, that there are honestly there's like an honest, like, great collaboration between all parties.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. It's impossible, especially in a universe where the creators don't even talk to each other at all.
Yeah.
You know, like where a writer sends a script to an editor, then the editor pushes it along to a penciler. How can you have synergy that way? You know, I just don't know. And John Byrne started working on X-Men like issue 108 maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and Dark Phoenix Saga happens in the 120s. Days of Future Past 141. Everybody, Byrne, Austin, Claremont, Glynis, the colorist, Tom Morzakowski, the letterer, they were all working together for years and years before they did the stuff that's like the hallmark of the series. So they had this opportunity to become a unit, like Voltron,
Yeah.
And you can't really point to many other instances where that was possible, in the 70s and later, in a lot of ways, and doing work at that level.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like that stuff is pretty much the top of the game for me. And I've read and reread like the series several times, but that Essential X-Men #2 is something that I've read like dozens of times.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up on those. Like that was one of my gateways into comics. I started off with like X-Men animated series and the trading cards and everything like that. But
Yeah, sure.
that got me into those essentials because that was pretty much it for like the big trades when I was growing up. And but yeah.
I was just gonna say that, like, what a great introduction, because it's like, you have this phone book sized thing
Mm-hmm.
that costs $15. You know what I'm saying? It costs nothing. It like each issue inside that tray would be like 60 cents. It's almost like the cover price that they were when they came out in the essential format, except you just have to drop out the color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I did want to ask about something I read on Twitter that you said on Twitter you actually had the chance to spend a couple hours with Chris Claremont in New York City before NYCC. What was that like, both as a creator and as like as a creator working on this project in specific, and as like a longtime X-Men fan?
I had the chance to interview Chris on stage in front of a crowd in January of this year. That's where I first met him. We were in France at a festival called Angoulême,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a really good conversation there. I felt like I learned a lot, and he invited me whenever I'm in New York. He hit him up,
Mm-hmm.
so I took him up on that. Went to his place, and I was humble in his presence as since I'm working on this thing that's essentially his. I absolutely felt like I felt humbled, like I was dating his daughter and just met him for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
or something. You
Or
know
you're
what I'm
asking
saying?
for
like,
his hand in marriage or something,
well, not his, but
or
let's say
his wife's,
daughter's.
his daughters. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll go with that. So I was just super humble in his presence, and I had a lot of questions. He was in a way different situation than I am with this thing, because I have all of this material that he put together,
Mm-hmm.
and I can go in and give it my own kind of personal polish.
Yeah.
But his situation was all riffing and coming up with this stuff with such kinetic speed that confounds me, to be honest. I can do 8 pages in a month. Um, and this guy's writing 3 books in a month, and sometimes X-Men came out 2 times in a month. Um, I so there are things that he did that I had to ask him about, because my exercise for grand design is to try to make all of this stuff work together as a unit, and take out any kind of Deus Ex Machina stuff that got put in there to just kind of give the writer a chance to get out of that paper bag that they put themselves in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him certain things. Chris, man, I'm going to have to really finesse how I'm going to get Scott Summers to diss his wife, Madeline Pryor, and kid when Jean Grey comes back to life, and she cracks out of that cocoon. I'm going to have to do a lot of finessing and try to figure out how to make that work. And he said, Ed, there is no finessing. It was a cluster F, he said. So, like when he said that to me, it was had a sense of liberation,
right,
in a way, because he acknowledges that some of the stuff just was not perfect, and it's not even his fault. It's a big machine. X-Men was probably the most successful comic of that era. So when that happens, a lot of chefs want to put their hand in the soup, So he had editorial stuff he had to deal with. New titles are getting launched around him, and he had to make all this stuff work.
And just the speed, like you were saying.
Yeah, it's insane. Beyond writing all those issues, I have no idea how a guy or girl draws, 22 pages in a month.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it.
Yeah.
It's a heck of a grind.
It really is. We're going to talk about X-Men Grand Design in full now. For listeners that don't know, it's Ed retelling the first 280 issues of the X-Men / Uncanny X-Men, as it became later on, series, minus the reprints they did for a while, of course. That'd be really weird if you went back through those again. In a 6-issue limited series. That's an insane undertaking. You've already kind of touched on that, just because X-Men is a very convoluted saga. How did this project first come together?
After doing Hip Hop Family Tree, it was pretty successful, and it's weird. I try to think of how it really did start and why I did some of the things I've done, and all that I can say is, in a moment of total ego and hubris, I just tweeted this image of it was like Wolverine jumping down at a Sentinel's head.
Mm-hmm.
And it was from an old comic that I put up on Boing Boing, about just my relationship with comics or something. And I tweeted this image and just said, Marvel should let me make whatever X-Men comic I feel like making. And I sort of said it in jest, but also kind of serious,
mm-hmm.
because given the opportunity, I certainly would I certainly would do an X-Men comic within an hour. And that is absolutely no exaggeration. Axel Alonso hit me up and was just like, okay, pitch something, man. Like, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
So I told him, and I'm not I don't really read much comics gossip or the news websites or whatever. So I don't know about any political X-Men's movie rights are owned by this. So I don't know about all that stuff, but it seems like everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, we got to see if Marvel will give it the go ahead, blah blah blah. And they ultimately did. From that initial tweet to putting pencil to paper on issue 1. It was about 5 or 6 months, which was perfect because I still had to finish Grand Design. Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 4.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 4, and about 3 weeks later, I started drawing X-Men.
Mm-hmm. Was there any part of you that, I mean, let's be honest. Like, I think that you could make a pretty good argument that the X-Men have the most convoluted history of any of the superhero world, of anything in the superhero world. Was there any part of you that as soon as you got the job, you're like, shit, what did I get myself into?
I like to set myself up with like big challenges.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to answer this question because I'm only half finished with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have a lot of opportunity to ask that of myself, like what the heck am I involving myself in?
Yeah.
To me, everything that I do and everything that you see from me is basically a selfish exercise in comics making. I'm a student. I'm a student of this form, and I intend to be a student of this form until the day that I die. So the exercise here is, like you said, to take all these issues and to try to make, basically I'm taking these periodical magazines that came out monthly, and I'm trying to turn it into a graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
Some things will be excised that are just not important to the broad story. Some stuff is going to have to be changed because it either sucks in its current printed stage, or I want to have it fit into this story that I'm going to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Some fanboys might cry about like this or that, and what I would say to them is, the comics that you still have in your long boxes are still there. Like, I'm not coming to your house and burning down your comics collection. But I'm also thinking about other people.
Right.
A part of a big scheme that I've developed early on was to focus on people who don't necessarily read comics.
Mm-hmm.
I did that computer hacker thing called WYSIWYG, and I got invited to a lot of, hacker festivals, and it was Silicon Valley that created podcasting, and my comic was reviewed on all of the early podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
On I was making this comic when the most popular guy on Twitter was Leo Laporte, the tech guy on KFI.
Yeah.
He had a whole whopping 5,000 followers, and to get a retweet from him, sold a bunch of my stuff. The hip hop thing, I brought new readers into the game with that. To me, the coolest superhero comic is X-Men, and I'm going to show people who've never given X-Men a shot why X-Men is so freaking cool.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, that's one of the nice things about the way that you have to approach it is like you can look at something like one thing, I don't think this is a spoiler because you've mentioned other interviews, although I'm not really sure if you can really spoil your comic because it's retelling like 280 issues of comics that have already come out. But I mean, you have the Phoenix showing up way early in the story, and it's because it's like kind of a building block that you want to put in there so it makes more sense later. It's not just this random thing that shows up. It works in the comics, but you're in it operating in a completely different and more compressed format. Why was that something you wanted to do that just made sense? Like, why was that something that made sense to do in the context of X-Men Grand Design?
You're talking about the Phoenix thing?
Yeah, Phoenix, but also just like, I guess, like, did you find that you had to like kind of compress different things and make different things show up earlier on to just make, appearances have more weight later on when they actually do show up?
Like, we'll use the Phoenix thing as an example of
Sure.
how I describe my approach, because there were several reasons to kind of introduce that concept fairly early. And because once again, this is just a personal exercise to make all these issues work as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
And early on, there is a fair number of like extraterrestrial villainy
Mm-hmm.
that the X-Men have to encounter. The Stranger, Mutant Master, a couple other things here and there, and I wanted to kind of create a little bit something more like to that stuff. I wanted to give these alien guys a purpose, like for just because those early comics, it was just monster of the month, villain of the month. Guy shows up, X-Men defeat them, and wash, rinse, repeat, issue after issue. So I just wanted to give them a little bit more weight. Also, when you have a chance where like the character Mastermind meets Jean Grey for the first time in X-Men like issue 4, but then the Dark Phoenix thing happens. He starts to sow the seeds of manipulating her mind in like issue 130 or 120 or something. It's nice to give some lead up to that.
Right.
So having the benefits of hindsight and foresight, having all of these issues kind of internalized and mapped out, I could play around with those things.
Yeah.
If you read all of these comics one after the other, to me it's really corny, man. When you read 30 issues of a comic and you never hear of Cyclops' brother until you just grab an issue and then there he is.
Right.
Not only does he have this brother, but they're going to his college graduation or something. That's no good, man. That's no good. So let's build him in early, and knowing how these characters are going to develop later. Let's prepare for that in the comics so that it's not just this abrupt kind of nonsense. And that's what it is. That's sort of why I put the Phoenix in there early. I wanted to build in the Dark Phoenix stuff early, hints of Genosha from super early on. It just I see it as a singular story, so I'm putting it down in that way. And we'll see how readers respond, man. Like, all that I know is I'm having a really good time building it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think it's kind of an amazing project because you get to kind of revisit your past and like dig into all these comics and find out how you would have told it if you had a chance to tell basically the same story. It's really awesome. But like, I'm kind of curious, like, how much time up front did you spend kind of like cutting and organizing to plan out the 6-issue structure? Like, did you do that before you started diving into the first pages?
I did, and I probably took 2 months of reading and research to kind of structure like what all is required to fit into each of the 6 issues. And then what I do is I just focus on each issue specifically as a unit, knowing where everything is going to go. So I did that 2-month stint of kind of figuring everything out. Then I would go back and know, like, okay, man, issue 1, it's not even clean in as much as like, okay, issue 1 focuses on X-Men 1 through 50 or something like that, because I'm taking a lot of the history that was kind of like doled out in little spurts throughout those 280 issues, and then I'm just putting all of that stuff in the first issue. So X-Men 1 isn't even covered until issue 2. It's so weird. Like, my entire career, and I heard comedians talk about this similar phenomenon on a podcast recently, where they look back at their career and they acknowledge that if they had to do it over again, they just couldn't. You know what I'm saying? Like just like all the stuff that they sort of overcame, all of the luck that they had. It's hard to imagine having the fortitude to do it again.
Right.
And so I think back to like when I started putting this together, and I actually don't exactly remember how it all congealed at the beginning, to be honest.
Sure.
But I can tell you that I'm literally at the point of no return, man. Like, as soon as I get off the phone with you, like the page that I'm doing right now is page 121 of like 240. So it's like I'm just beyond the halfway point.
I thought you were going to say that you're on issue 121, which is one of when I was a kid, like when I couldn't obviously I couldn't afford like the old X-Men comics, and one of the first ones
Yeah.
that I got was from like the older runs was 121. I think that was like, God, what is one? That was like the first appearance of Alpha Flight, I think it is, and it's funny how like that was one, like I had that, and I had like the like one of like the first appearance of the Dark Phoenix, and like those comics just blew my mind. They're these treasures that I still have to this day. Like it's funny how those things work. But anyways, that's just where my mind goes. It's funny how X-Men is this thing where you could just say a number, and like an X-Men's fan or X-Men fan's mind could immediately tie back to that number. Like I don't know, like X-Men number
I
4 is
love that. I love that. Yeah, I just love that about comics, like in general, because I go to a convention, and we could talk Kirby, and guys are reciting not only an issue but a page
right.
and a panel number. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And they're not speaking above the next person. Like the person they're talking to like knows exactly where they're going and like riffs on it and stuff. I sort of like that, like that we kind of like are meticulous about it. I think it shows a lot of respect to the creator.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That was something I thought was really interesting about you. I read in an interview that you said that you never really followed the characters for the X-Men. You kind of just were all about the creators and everything. And I thought that was interesting. I, for one, was like a hardcore Wolverine fan, which I'm pretty sure everyone that kind of, I was born in '84. And so I was kind of right in the same zone as you. And that was really when
Yeah.
they were pushing Wolverine like crazy. But I thought that was
Right.
kind of interesting. It sounds like you were kind of on the creator side from the get-go.
Pretty much, man. I mean, I before I had my very first printed professional comics page, I've
Mm-hmm.
I've done over 1,000 pages up to that point of comics, and a lot of them were X-Men pages. Um, just as a kid or whatever, I was always on the hunt for information on how to make comics. I bet I was like the youngest person ever to have copies of the Comics Journal
Mm.
and listen to, read these interviews with guys to just try to glean information. So I've always been in that direction. And I had friends who messed with comics a little bit here and there, and they were just like so steeped into the characters
Mm-hmm.
that I just didn't feel it. I never did. I was always not cynical or whatever, but just like sort of realistic. Like, what are you talking about? This is like, this is lines on paper. This is just like people make this.
Right.
Um, and I have always been that way, man. Like up at New York Comic Con, pretty much the main reason I was there was to be a part of like the Marvel X-Men like hype panel,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, you have the writers and editors of the various new books
Mm-hmm.
up there to kind of give like an elevator pitch to the crowd and all that. And first off, I've never done anything like that before. The only thing that I do not do on my books is like write that back cover hyperbole,
Oh,
because
sure.
I'm so shy about that. I could sell your book to somebody. I just can't do it for myself. I'm way too shy. Um, and here I am on a dais with standing room only, um, and that's what we're here to do. And I'm quite sure I bombed it pretty badly. But when they opened it up for Q&A, the first question that this bespectacled Cyclops cosplayer asked was, who's your favorite X-Man? And and everybody gave these like very like honest answers, like they had an answer ready to go,
Right.
and I'm the last guy on the dais, and I'm trying to like manufacture some kind of answer to give to not sound like an elitist jerk off. But then I also have like, Jaime Hernandez in the back of my mind, like making fun of me, and Klaus and these dudes, Gary Groth, the
Yeah.
Fantagraphics publisher, like, so I have this pressure. And then I ultimately said long shot because I'm an Art Adams fan.
Yeah.
So I had to even qualify it for my own self, for whatever reason, for whatever insecurities I have. But I just never think about like character in that way, really. But just the idea of X-Men is super cool. And I did another interview where they're like, what does X-Men mean to you? And the person who asked me that, they have an answer for that question, like for themselves. They really care about it in more than just like a fun comic way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't share that. Like I just think it's a really cool comic.
Yeah.
And that's all that I have to give when like answering that kind of question, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. And I mean, it seems like it was pretty consistent from the start from you. I remember we talked about, I interviewed you for that Marvel Universe trading cards piece I did. And you talked about, I remember you were talking specifically about how like you used to study those the Art Adams cards that he did, like the ones he did with the duotone and everything. And
Yeah.
I remember I went on this like total duotone run after that because I'd never even heard about that before. And and it's funny because it's just like that's just how some people are, and like that's another magic of a comics thing is like everyone can have their different reason for loving them, and you don't have to just be somebody who has that character you love. You can be somebody who just happens to love duotone and Art Adams getting drawn really tiny people in a Sauron card.
Yeah, that it's so funny, man. And then also the way he draws Ghost Rider, man, with that
Yeah.
with a super tiny skull, and it's like you're imagining that like he's like, oh yeah, man, the skull would be small because there's like muscle and meat and skin that sits on top of it to make the size of a normal human head, but underneath it is just like this tiny bone skull, and he draws it so big hulking body with that little Beetlejuice head.
I never thought about that. If you had a big skull, that would mean you would just have a freaking massive head when it was all there.
Totally.
Of course.
Totally. That's the thing about his work. Like there's all this thought that goes into it. It's not just surface elements, like these things fit into each other, and there's consistent like wind blowing through. If there is wind, you know what I'm saying? Like I could make a whole blog and show you a bunch of examples where the artist is not faithful to the way the wind is supposed to be blowing, and stuff like that. But he's he's just such a thoughtful illustrator.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things from the interviews I did for that piece was I talked to him, and I talked to Tom Brevoort about it too, and they both had different perspectives on this. But I remember Tom Brevoort was like, all we needed was these like quarter-page size pieces, and Art would still draw it full page because he couldn't do the level of detail he wanted if he was doing on that smaller size. So he didn't need to do the page, or like you were talking about with the Sauron stuff, or like the little people in there. The only way he could get to that level of detail is if he was blowing it up to the full size. And I thought that's dedication to the craft. I mean, he is all about realizing his vision in as real of a way as possible.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was saying earlier about like once you hit a certain position and you then have wiggle room to design your career and like to basically do things kind of on your terms. He's been that way for a long time. Like basically with this X-Men thing that I'm doing, I'm working Art Adams' schedule. He did like 2 issues of something a year,
right,
back in the 80s. And I'm doing 2 issues a year. Like I'm handling every piece. Like I'm handling the writing and all that stuff. But his sheer like level of mark making required that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly OCD and just compulsive behavior is one of the elements that I identify inside the kind of psychological makeup of all of my favorite cartoonists, and he is absolutely no exception.
Mm-hmm.
His level of craft and mark making and understanding of light and line and craft has been increasing over time.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will say that things get easier over time or something, but he's certainly not that kind of guy who could say that, I don't think, man, because his Art Adams work is just getting more and more meticulous.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
So, you started kind of touching on, you're talking about his process and everything. And for listeners that don't know, we already kind of touched on this. Ed does everything. Literally everything. He writes, he does line art, colors, lettering, you name it. For grand design, like what is your actual process like? Are you writing do you write a full scripts for yourself?
No, I've never like sat down and like wrote like a movie plot type script or
Sure.
whatever. I basically do a quick and dirty version of the comic on 8.5 by 11 paper.
Mm-hmm.
I'll write the page on notebook paper, try to figure out how many panels, yada yada, and then I do these roughs on 8.5 by 11. I call it it's a workable prototype, man. Do it quick and dirty, and then see how the thing works as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to add some beats here and there, yada yada, and then after that, it's time to put the damn thing together in a real way. For the first three issues, only would I would write 2 pages a week and then draw them,
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh.
and then just keep it going because the stuff the comics were the narrative was pretty tight in as much as like, okay, I knew everything that needed to be covered. Now what I would do from the start would be, I have 40 pages an issue, so I would have 40 bullet points of like what would happen on each page, and then send that off for approval, and then the editor would just give the thumbs up, and then I would go back and draw them. Basically, I work at the schedule of believe it or not, like a daily comic strip cartoonist,
Mm.
where you do like 6 tiers of strips, for the week,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do the bigger piece for the Sunday. Like it equals out to the exact same amount of work that
That's
a
interesting.
dedicated. Yeah. It sort of that crossed my mind about halfway through the third issue, where I'm like, this is exactly what it is. Because once again, you got to trick your mind into just doing the work, and I'm staring at this bookshelf full of Peanuts comics
Mm-hmm.
and Terry and the Pirates and stuff, and it's like, hey man, if these guys could do it, I could keep this pace up, no problem. But that's the process. I can't linger, and I can't do any one component piece of comics making for too long before it gets boring. So then I have to switch it up, and just to keep fresh, keep the thing fun.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's really interesting how you were saying like the comic strip thing, because one of the things I thought was interesting about the book was, or I mean, just your work in general. I mean, Hip Hop Family Tree was published online, and then it was brought into books and everything like that. And X-Men Grand Design, I there was a part of me that kind of thought it would make more sense as like maybe 3 graphic novels or something like that. Did you guys ever consider like different options for how you would release it from the start?
Well, I mean, it's not a 6 issue miniseries. It's it's a trilogy of 3 2 issue miniseries. So there are going to be 3 books.
Oh, okay.
There are, and this thing's going to take me years. Like, the first 2 issues come out December, January. Trade paperback comes out in April,
Mm-hmm.
and then repeat that same process for like 2 years
Right.
after that. So the last one's going to be out in like 2019 or 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But the work is going to be really meticulous. The benefit of being just a cartoonist who's doing every piece of the assembly line is that though each page is a living document until the very end, when my editor wrestles it from my hands and hits the button to make it start printing, basically.
Right.
So what I mean by that is I reread what I've done fairly regularly,
Mm-hmm.
and I refuse to let anything that doesn't kind of pass my muster. I don't. It doesn't stand. It's got to be changed. And I have that opportunity to do that because I don't have to like recommission a letterer
Right.
to, you know what I'm saying? Like, or a penciler who's on a hamster wheel and has to like, he already spent the money he made, from that page. He can't redraw a panel.
Mm-hmm.
He has to keep moving forward. So like, I just don't have those concerns. and I don't have those limitations like a regular assembly line process, man. So that's like a tremendous benefit to the whole enterprise, man, because I redrew 10, 11 panels of issue one
Mm-hmm.
over the course of a year and a half, where I just would like go look through it and it's like, nah, that Captain America's kind of weak. Let me redraw that.
Mm-hmm. You work traditionally though, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
So
For the most part, I mean, I have to color it in the computer and
right.
prepare the files that way, just because a printing house would look at me crazy
Just sitting
if
over
I
Bristol boards.
write in like registration marks and color separations. They wouldn't know what to do with it.
No, I don't. Actually, that is funny. I wonder how many people actually even know how to color traditionally anymore. Uh,
Even my editor asked me what font I use to letter, and I'm like, this is on the board, man. Thank you for the compliment.
it is pretty amazing. I mean, like the hand lettering thing, that doesn't happen that often anymore. I mean, you do that. God, I mean, I guess a lot of cartoonists do it. Like Dustin Harbin, I know is really great at hand lettering.
Sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, one thing I want to actually ask you about is kind of tangentially related to that. Like the part of the first issue is you're recoloring X-Men #1 by Stan and Jack. Was that a little like intimidating for you, or was that just something you kind of like you're recoloring it into your style? Is that something that you had fun with?
Well, that's going to be for the first trade paperback.
Oh, it's for the first trade.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like the first issue is just it's just my comic.
Mm-hmm.
But for the trade, like I've gone back and did that, and basically, just to answer your question, like it wasn't intimidating, because I'm basically restoring Kirby to Kirby.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using, if he had at his disposal a coloring box of millions and millions of color that Photoshop allows us,
Right.
he may have drawn it a different way. And that's not even given the fact that, like, with modern technology, we don't even have to ink anymore. Inking is a vestige. So he was drawing, they were making these comics like to a certain standard that was available at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, comics is about a successful comics page is about clarity and congruency.
Mm-hmm.
And you destroy a comic putting like shitty computer font lettering over very organic line work, like a Bill Sienkiewicz
Mm-hmm.
piece of artwork. If it had like a crappy font over top of it, it just doesn't make sense. It's not congruent. It
Right.
doesn't work. Um, so I'm very comfortable in saying, and I will call this a shot. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But like this, the recoloring that X-Men #1 is going, and it's going to be on paper like Hip Hop Family Tree. It's going to be the greatest Kirby color reprint in existence for any company, anywhere. Like, and all you have to do is pick up any reprint of Kirby's anywhere, and then you see, like, that it's just like garish,
Mm-hmm.
super white paper. Just doesn't work, man. You will see.
Yeah, and it's
You will see.
honestly, and it's not like X-Men #1. No, I mean, not to disparage the person who originally colored it, but it's not like it's a book that's notable for its colors. Like it's not something that's. I don't know if you really like. That's I'm trying to think of the right term, but it's not something that people are going to really. I can't imagine they're going to be too upset about it. It's something that could probably use it, and so it'll be really interesting to see.
I think people are going to be like, okay, this is freaking cool, man,
Yeah.
because like there when you put like airbrush gradation and that computer coloring and stuff, it takes the Kirby out of Kirby. It
Right.
takes the pop. It takes. You remember those old X-Men comics, man? Like the first couple years, man. Like how in the corner box it said something like "Pop Art Comics," man, because it was. Thinking about it, it was X-Men #1. There is a close-up of Magneto's eyes that turned into a Lichtenstein painting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like you have the Ben-Day dots,
Right.
four color stuff. That's Kirby, man. He is pop art. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? So it's like, well, let me rescue this stuff take it back to the pop art roots of it, and I won't be surprised if we see a lot of imitators going back and giving giving these old comics like a fairer shake on the
Sure.
color part of it, man, because you're going to see like, okay, this is how you do it.
Hmm.
This is the big complaint that me and all my cartoonist friends have all the time whenever they put out, and by they I mean everybody.
Right.
Whenever they put out like new reprints of these old guys, like and they just have crappy paper and all that, man. So it's like rather than just be a complainer, I'll get in the game, I'll do my thing, and in a lot of ways it's an excuse to show everybody like what I mean, man, by
Yeah.
like, yeah, this is how these comics are meant to be presented.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So I did want to mention, I was trying to think about this, and I feel like Tom Brevoort would probably yell at me if he heard this. I can't honestly think of another Marvel comic that's ever just been done by one person. Like, I honestly don't know if there's another book that's just been done by a cartoonist. Are you a pioneer in that way, or is that well tread ground that I'm just not aware of?
I don't think so. Like I think I am the first
Hmm.
to do it in this way. You know, there are examples like Jim Steranko who did several jobs, and he created that iconic X-Men logo that we all know, that like 3D going
Hmm.
off into infinity kind of logo. He did that.
I had no
Um,
idea he did that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's his creation. Um, and he also did a lot of color and stuff like that. But there are a few guys who do everything but the lettering, and to me, it's like the lettering is what people read.
Hmm.
You know, you gotta have control over that. Like if you don't have control over that, then that means you can't change things at the last minute. That means that the same hand that inked that figure is the same hand that wrote that balloon, and there's just a consistency and congruency there that that doesn't exist at all on an assembly line process. So for like Marvel DC, like yeah, like this is new. But the cloth that I'm cut from is the Fantagraphics cloth, man, and that's standard operating procedure where I come from.
Right. Yeah. No, I do think it's so this is just like a weird thing that I know is just 100% a thing, but it's something I don't really ever hear people talk about. Um, Artists who like you talked about congruous and everything being congruent and everything. Like the way that artists draw or write is so one for one for how they draw. Like you can like even me, like I'm a terrible artist. If I draw, it would be so reflective of my handwriting in a lot of ways, just because that's how I lay down lines and everything. And so I totally get what you're saying. It just makes sense for hand lettering to feel more natural when it's combined with the same line artist.
Right, right, yeah. Like, and I could point to thousands of examples of that. And um, the other thing that I could say though is like, what you said about like your art and your writing or whatever. Like, um, I really truly believe that anybody can make a really great, compelling comic if they just simply had the patience to generate the pages.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would read your comic, absolutely. Like whether you're a seasoned creator or not, I would read your comic if it's like honest and it's legible, basically. You know what I'm saying? But like the actual visuals, they don't matter as much as the idea
Mm-hmm.
or like what you're trying to get across. It's drawing in service of something more than just pretty pictures. So like you don't need to have Brian Bolland levels of craft
Right.
to make like a really really great comic. And furthermore, when you have like a cartoonist, um, and there are many jobs to kind of juggle to make the thing, um, you can have varying levels of all of these. It's not a jack of all trades, master at nothing thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely you lean towards your strengths, and you could still make a great comic. Like I don't know anybody that would honestly say that like Mobius is like the greatest comics writer of all time or something like that. but he makes great comics.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Uh, regardless of the writing per se or something like this.
Mm-hmm. No,
So there's
so
just
it's
more opportunity.
yeah. So is it kind of like you're saying? I don't know. I mean, I feel like sometimes people get too like style is so subjective, and I feel like people kind of get obsessed with style when it comes to art. And it's like if you can tell a story, and if you can kind of hook somebody into what you're talking about, it almost doesn't even really matter what it looks like.
Sure, yeah, in a lot of ways, and that style argument is almost everybody's fault because the rough stage that I make these comics in, um, on the 8.5 by 11 paper,
Mm-hmm.
that is pure comics. You know what I'm saying? It's pure storytelling. It's
Mm-hmm.
pure everything. But and if there were, like, say, millions of cartoonists in America, and they all bought comics, like, they would buy this version of it. But
Right.
there's not, so, like, the reader has been conditioned to be kind of superficial, to a large extent with the visuals.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to make pretty drawings, basically. You have to make something that is pleasing to the eye in some form or fashion. You have to put some nuance and craft to the art, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
But uh, it's totally not necessary. And, like, for instance, like, I got the absolute Batman Year One,
Yeah.
and it has all the Mazzucchelli thumbnails.
Yeah.
That, once again, that's pure comics. That part of it. What the reader gets is spoon-fed stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But real comics is rarely seen by the general public, like, because it's at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's at that molecular level, man. And that's where all the magic is, man. That's where, like, the real storytelling happens, and you figure stuff out, and this panel to that panel. It's really fun.
Yeah, no, that is one of the things I think is really interesting, and it's not just web comics, but you sometimes see these like comics that are really simple, 4-panel strips that pop up on Twitter that are like super successful, and it's not like you would think this person is Alex Ross, but it's so effective, it's like so effective at conveying the story and like hitting you with this beat, like it's 4 panels, it's simple art, and it crushes, and I kind of. I hope that this kind of era where people are a little bit more, if I kind of feel like we're almost like more flexible to the way that like comic strips used to work. I wonder if that's going to be like kind of we're going to reverse back to not being so focused on style. I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a kind of back and forth, and you could be successful either way.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to be really great, man. And I would go so far as to say that it's way harder to make a 4-panel thing work on a very successful way than it is a bigger book. You
Yeah.
just have way more chances with a big book to get everything to pay off and connect in the end, man. But a 4-panel strip has to be basically like, you have to be a virtuoso
Yeah.
to make something great, man. And like, look at Jules Pfeiffer's art. Like, it's not, it's fairly gestural and kinetic.
Mm-hmm.
But he did amazing comic strips, man, just because he was a bright guy.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be a bright person. You have to have some intellect, and you got to have something to say, man. Like, the thing about comics is it takes so long to figure out how to make them,
Right.
that most of us live our damn lives on paper for the first 20-25 years of our lives without having much to say.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have to go out, get our hearts broken a couple times, perhaps get in trouble with the law once somehow. You got to live a life, and then you finally have some stuff to talk about and make some strips that resonate.
Yeah. So I just have a few more questions. I want to actually ask you. We kind of touched on this earlier. You come from like the Fantagraphics world. You come from self-publishing. You come from bookstores. Is it weird kind of getting into this world of like Marvel and comic shops and things like that? I'm sure Hip Hop Family Tree has had plenty of support in the comic shop market. I mean, I bought all of the collections from comic shops. But is it weird at all for you as a creator to kind of get into that world now?
Um, there is baggage that comes with that.
Hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm conscious of that, and it basically just comes from fandom.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So in my earliest days, I was a comics fan of a stripe.
Hmm.
Always leaning towards growing up to become a creator. Um, but as a for instance, like on that panel, that Marvel hype panel that I was on,
Hmm.
um, I knew that I was in trouble on that dais when I said the name Chris Claremont, and that got way fewer claps than like a guy who talked, two stories before me, who mentioned that Gambit and Rogue are together again, and
Yeah.
and the whole room like goes crazy.
Yeah.
Now I'm not hating, I'm not looking down on it, but I just don't come from that.
Right.
Um, and frankly, um, that's a limited crew. You know what I'm saying? Like those people are already in the game.
Hmm.
But my focus has always been, like I said earlier, on attracting new people. Like if as cartoonists we all were a little bit conscious of bringing some new blood into the game, we would have an extremely thriving, uh, beautiful market. You know what I'm saying? And there would be way more comic readers.
Hmm.
But as it stands, man, like with Hip Hop Family Tree, I was sent around the country for 4 years with basically the same people, to different like literary festivals and stuff. So I would be sent with you know uh, John Lewis and the crew, Andrew Aiden,
From March.
from March, Raina Talgemeyer,
Hmm.
Jean Lun Yang.
Yeah.
Um, like we all kind of have a monopoly on making certain kinds of comics that just aren't being made, and we benefit from that,
Right.
because there's just nobody else, man. And it's like I look at all of my brethren, man, even people super close to me, and I'm like, don't you see what we're doing? And
Hmm.
we're getting all this opportunity and having all this success. And it's like, nah, man, like the bulk of creators are very kind of masturbatory,
Hmm.
and they just think of themselves. So it's like they want to draw like I don't know, knights or something like that. But they don't want to like do research on early uh, English warfare or something. They just want
Right.
to draw like a knight with a flame sword or some bullshit like that, man. And it's like, okay, I mean, maybe that could hit, but it. I don't know. I'm just more interested in bringing new people to the game. It is a different audience. I have to I don't look at social media anymore in a significant way. Like I don't look at responses because I just I'm preparing for fanboys to be mad at me giving Professor X his like little Jim Lee hover chair too early.
I actually really like what you had to say about how, like, that crew you were talking about that you're traveling with to those literary festivals. It's like they're telling stories that other people aren't. Like, I two different people I really like are Kate Beaton and Jillian Tamaki, and like both of them do really great stuff that not many, like, nobody does anything like Super Mutant Magic Academy. Like that's a really unique comic, and I think it's kind of cool where you guys are kind of, it's not you're like deliberately finding niches. It's just because you're creating these comics, you're realizing that there's kind of audiences that aren't being served by making the comics.
I think, and in a way, I'm going to be obnoxious and kind of speak for everybody
Hmm.
here. Um, we're just we have outside interests besides comics,
Right.
but comics is our language. It's a way that we can clearly speak and communicate and get our ideas out. So we make comics about these outside interests that just haven't been tapped in comics in any real way. But it absolutely is like everybody you described, Kate, um, the people who do Lumberjanes,
Right.
like we're we're all just making the comics that we want, and then oh, how about that? There's a whole universe of people out there who have never given comics a shot, but they're into this thing or that thing, so they give comics a shot, and then they become comics fans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can you could do things the other way, and just do genre stuff that really connects. But you have to be The Walking Dead. You have to have a TV show or movie to support it.
Right.
That's the only way that you'll get people outside of the game to even know about it.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
look at like a good example of something that really blew up that like didn't. I don't think anybody really even saw an audience for it. Is like Scott Pilgrim. Like Brian Lee O'Malley made that, and then next thing you know, like my nephew who didn't, kind of dabbled in comics, he was just like, I gotta have all the Scott Pilgrim books. I mean, that was. It is kind of amazing when things like that happen. Although I guess it did eventually have a movie. I think it was already pretty popular before then.
it's true. Yeah, and that is like if you were going to if you were a betting man, um, that is more of a lottery win than the sort of other way
Mm-hmm.
of just like exploring this like other kind of like territory that just hasn't been tapped in a way. Though I think he certainly hit something that hasn't been tapped, and there's actually room to even grow from that because I still don't think I think that Scott Pilgrim is like the closest anybody's come to like bringing like video game vibes to
Sure.
a comic, but I don't think he did it perfectly. Like I think somebody's going to do it in like a really amazing way that's going to like really really catch and is going to be a super success.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're totally right in that. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is something not related to any of this stuff. You created a comic, a mural, and the box for a special Baltimore edition of the Nike Air Force Ones. And I for one, think the Nike Air Force One story is pretty amazing. The shoes story.
Yeah.
Given your interests, I have to imagine that was a project that was a pretty big highlight for you. What was that experience like? And was there a particular thrill in getting to tackle something? I mean, that shoe is legendary. That shoe is eternal. Like it still
Right.
sells huge numbers, despite the fact that it was created in like 1982. Was that a big deal for you?
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. I I just don't like to do too much of that kind of like work for hire stuff
Sure,
because it's the closest as an artist that I've ever felt like just having a job.
sure.
Because not only does like an ad agency have to like put in their 2 cents,
Ah,
but then it has to pass their muster before it goes to Nike, and then they got the stuff that they have to say. Now, now, I had an opportunity to work on several shoe projects before this,
mm-hmm.
and those sneakers were corny. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
there was
yeah, yeah.
no way that I was going to participate in some garbage. Um, I'm down with the Air Force One. Like the only sneakers that I could have done something for would have been like um, the first like Jordans, the Air Force One, like the Converse All Star, and like the Puma Clydes, man, like the
Mm-hmm.
classic Pumas. Um, so when they came to me with this, it was actually there's an X-Men connection to this, by the way, because one of the former pencilers, Karen Dwyer,
Oh yeah.
um, he does a lot of work for that ad agency that Nike works with called White and Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
and they um, were just going to have him work in my style, like because he works with them a lot and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me along some of the stuff that they were having him do, and literally like drawing my version of Dr. Dre with like the scrubs and all that stuff. And he told them like you could just get the guy.
Right.
You could just say, which was extremely honorable, man, because there's a lot of stuff out there, man, like that rap yearbook and that kind of garbage where it's like they're totally cribbing my thing, man, but and sort of benefiting. So it's like super honorable of Karen Dwyer to like put me down with those guys and everything, man.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a grind, like it wasn't the end product was really fun, man, and uh it was like a shoebox. Like there's like design elements on an Air Force One sneaker, like 4 or 5 shirts,
Mm-hmm.
mural around the building, um, all sorts of other stuff, man. There's like wraps on these like Escalades. There's like a these plaques that are hanging like at the shoe stores. There's a lot of stuff that we did.
Yeah. Did you do the Baltimore strap that's on it?
Yeah,
I was gonna say because that totally looks like your style.
yeah. Like I imagine that like you saw like a Post Gazette, a Pittsburgh Post Gazette like article about the thing, and I'm like, man, you're my hometown paper, and you're like diminishing what I did, like for this thing, because they were like, I designed a box. I'm like, yeah, I designed a box. Come on,
I
man.
think that was like the press release that I read. I don't know. I actually just find the Air Force Ones to be pretty interesting in general. I read this big feature that Complex Magazine did in like January about like their story and like kind of how they
Yeah.
evolved and everything. It's really fascinating, and it makes sense that they would get you considering the fact that it has like this incredible connection to the rap world. But it's a really, I don't know. I'm not a sneakerhead by any means, but at the same time, like I find the story to be really fascinating.
I do too. And one of the things that I find most fascinating about the history of the Air Force One, and I should just give like a little primer. In 1982, like when that sneaker came out, sneaker fashion, the way it worked was the same way that regular apparel fashion works. So a thing comes out for a season, it goes away.
Right.
There was an Air Force Two. We don't know about that sneaker because it came and went. But these three shop owners in Baltimore identified that people were coming in, day out. Yo, we want this Air Force One. We want this Air Force One sneaker. Forget about this Air Force Two thing. And these three shop owners got together. The Nike business, this is years before Jordan, they were able to just simply go to Portland, have a meeting with Phil Knight, the CEO, who simply said, "Okay, we will flick a switch and start making Air Force Ones for you specifically, but you have to order 1,000."
Right.
You know, dude, that's variant. That's
Yes.
variant covers for for enterprising shops where they get like the store specific, variant cover for X-Men Grand Design 1 or something. Got to order a grip, and then you get your very own. And that's exactly what they did, man. Like, they got to choose their colors, and they got a fresh pair every month, and they created the phenomenon that is the Air Force One. I had Air Force Ones when I was a little dude, and I got them from somebody who got them from these Baltimore guys.
Yeah. I think it's really funny that I was thinking the same thing about the variants when I read that, because that's exactly what it is. It's like, you have to meet this ordering gate, and then all of a sudden you unlock like the white on whites or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. And it is really fascinating. Like that really kind of fits your world. I mean, I know I think the last thing I saw you tweet before I did this was about the store exclusive variants. I mean, that's exactly what like Cinderella Shoes was doing. And
Totally.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. The historical aspect of the Air Force One, my reverence for the actual sneaker, like that is totally what got me into working on the thing, and it was a tremendous grind. Like I'll be honest, because I was working on X-Men too, so it's like, okay, I'm spending 8 hours a day working for Disney / Marvel, and then I'm spending another 8 hours working for Nike. Actually, that's to be honest, since we opened that can of worms, like that's why I didn't go to my sister's destination wedding, because I was just like, damn, like I have these 2 8-hour-a-day jobs and I just can't hack it. It's impossible. But I look back on it and I'm like, I have a lot of cool stuff to show for spending my summer that way. So yeah, super cool.
Yeah. Well, Ed, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to chat about everything comics with me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you taking the time to highlight this work, man. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Ed Piskor. You can find Ed on Twitter at Ed Piskor, on his website at edpiskor.com, and his work in Hip Hop Family Tree and the upcoming X-Men Grand Design. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Henning Allers, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Null, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Brander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Amnett, Matt Battaglia, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track, Outro, from their album Volmilch, opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.